Aloha! Welcome to this week's video. This is going to be part 2 and the finish of my Kanabo. I, I should be able to pronounce that better. I speak Japanese, but for some reason that's just a hard word. Sorry I didn't get a video out last week. I wasn't quite finished yet, and I actually had a lot to do and had a really busy week with the holidays and all, but we are back at it. So the first step that I'm at here is I'm just sanding down, rough sanding down to 120. I'm not going to be taking it down to 320 yet. Before I do that, I want to finish up the handle, or at least get the handle ready. And so what I wanted to do with the handle on the Kanabo was I wanted to make sectioned grooves, and I hadn't decided yet if I wanted to make them look like sections of balls that were connected together, or if I want to make them a little bit more rigid. I've done a little bit of research, and I think I wanted to make them a little bit more rigid so that there'd be more grip on the piece, because it's a cylindrical handle. So whenever you have a cylindrical handle that's really smooth, it tends to twist in your hand when you go for a really heavy or strong hit if you don't have grip on it. So on a baseball bat, it's cylindrical, but you've got that grip on it so you can hold on to it. I'm not going to have any lashing on this, and so I need the grooves to act as my grip for the handle. Before I get set on those, I put in a marker, or rather I just use pencil to pencil it in, and then just used a spacer to kind of make sure that all of the grooves had the same spacing. I didn't perfectly draw them in, I just got them close because I knew I was going to be roughing it in with my Dremel here. So that's just a tungsten carbide bit. It's actually the same bit that I use normally when I put in grooves for the teeth, although I'm going very deep with this and wide. And then one trick that I've learned throughout the years is I actually pull the Dremel across. When you pull it like that, you're able to get a cleaner line. And so I kind of used my hand as like a human lathe. I just held the Dremel and then pulled it across, or twisted the piece with one hand and then pulled the Dremel across, and it made it really easy for cutting in these grooves. And then from there I just needed to sand, and oh man, I had hours and hours of sanding. Oh, it was ridiculous. So I'm not going to be putting all the sanding in here, but just cleaning up the burn marks, cleaning up the scratches, making sure all the grooves are about the same size, cleaning up any sections. One thing that I also did is I widened the groove step at a time, which kind of gave it more of a rigid look. It looked like it went from the outer edge into a lower edge into a lower edge, and so it just looked a little bit better. And then from there I went on to working on the pommel side, or the end side of it. I am going to be cleaning up some of this with my chisel set. I just want some nice crisp edges right where the handle meets that end piece. A traditional Kanabo is usually rounded on the end, although I saw some where it was round, some where it's flat, some where it almost didn't have an end piece. I decided to go with this shape here. This is a little bit more of a Hawaiian style design. It's a diamond shape, and then it goes into a point. The whole piece itself is kind of, well, not kind of, it very much is a combination piece. So it mixes the Japanese culture that I'm familiar with. My wife is Japanese. And then most of my training for the weapons is Hawaiian weapons. And so this is a combination piece of Hawaiian weapons and Japanese, which is, I think, kind of cool. I've wanted to do this for a while. One thing that I noticed as I got ready to start sanding, and that's what all those little pencil marks are, is just so I can keep track of where I've sanded, is I noticed I still had a lot of little micro separations between some of the wood in some areas versus others. And so what I'm doing here is I'm using just some sawdust from the piece, filling that in, and then super gluing it, and that kind of fills in those gaps. It kind of hides them. And then I'll go ahead and sand the piece over it, and that'll just clean up those lines and get rid of any gaps that I have. It took a little bit of time. There's quite a bit of gaps. They weren't large. They're small, like needle-sized gaps. It's just, as I go to finish the piece, they'll really start to stick out, and I didn't want that at all. I also wanted to make sure there wasn't any weak joints. The super glue is not going to hold it together if it's a weak joint, but as I was inspecting them, I was just making sure that the cracks didn't go all the way through, and none of them did. I might have been able to sand them all out. I just didn't want to remove more material from the piece. It was just about the right dimension. I'm already going to be removing some when I go to sand it down to 320, but that's as far as I want to take it. You'll notice the wood now is darker. So I oiled it at this point, knowing that I was going to be cutting in a whole bunch of holes for the teeth. And I totally forgot to record me oiling the piece. So you'll see a little bit of me oiling it later. Unfortunately, I missed most of that. But it's okay because we'll get to see the finished piece at the end anyway. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm using bull shark teeth. And I've got two different generic sizes. So these are 1/2 inch bull shark teeth. Some of them a little bit larger than 1/2 inch, but for the most part 1/2 inch. And then I have smaller upper or lower bull shark. They're a little bit more pointy, and those are in between. I think those are like 3/8 inch in their size. Or no, not 3/8. Yeah, 3/8, just under 1/2 inch. So a little bit smaller than these, and that's what's going to be the offset. So if you look at a traditional Japanese piece, Japanese Kanabo, the wooden ones, they have the metal pegs, and they're kind of toggled back and forth. And so it gives a nice looking pattern. And so that's what I wanted to do with the teeth. And then I drew a center line down each one of the 8 edges so that I could kind of make sure that I'm keeping all the teeth in line. And then I'm using a spacer, just a hand spacer there to make sure the teeth are all roughly the same distance from one another. I'm not going to be lashing this. I'm going to be just epoxying them into place. And so I mixed some koa shavings from actually this piece here in with some 5-minute epoxy, and then that's what's going to set them in. There's a lot of spillover, and so I have to clean all that up, but that'll wait till the end. Now, one of the things that I was thinking about the entire time was, all right, I got this first edge done. Doing the second edge will be easy. Doing the third edge will be easy. But once I get to the fourth edge, what am I going to do there? So how I laid them out is I've got 4 edges. Well, I mean, there's 8 total edges, but the larger bull shark are going on 4 of the edges. So it's going every other. So one larger bull shark, smaller bull shark, larger bull shark, smaller bull shark, all the way around. So I'm doing the 2 larger bull shark first, and then once I get those 2 set into place, then I'll do the smaller bull shark. So it'll be 3 edges, and then I'll do the next 3 edges. Well, really the next 2 edges, because one of these edges makes up the third edge for the next set. But doing these first sets were pretty easy because the bull shark teeth is all pointed up. I had to be a little bit careful so I wouldn't cut myself. I did end up cutting myself later on. You'll see that. But it's really the same process. Just making sure I have good spacing between each teeth set, making sure they're all in line. If they're too far out of line, you'll notice, and it'll kind of look tacky. I didn't want that. And so these are the smaller bull shark. These are quite a little more cylindrical, not as blade-like like the larger ones, but super sharp, really sharp. So here's where I was kind of figuring out what to do. I wasn't quite sure because I didn't want to break a tooth while I was working on it. That'd be just a pain. So I had this piece of insulation foam that I'd been using as a stand, and I was like, wait a minute, I can just use a larger piece of this, stab the entire thing into it, and now I have a base. So that's what I did. I got a larger piece of this insulation foam. I use it for packaging all the time. It's really good foam. It's a denser, thick foam, so it's good for stuff like this. But it worked perfect. I just stabbed the teeth into it, and now I can start working on the top section. And so this ended up being the perfect way to hold the piece while I was putting in teeth for each of the other sides. So now I'm going to go through and just add in the teeth for all the rest of the sides. It took actually quite a while. I ended up doing just a couple sections per day, just so I'd give the teeth plenty of time to dry, plenty of time to set. I didn't want them to be moving around. I didn't want the epoxy to be soft while I was stabbing them into the the foam. So here's the final row. I've already put in all the rest of the rows. I just have one final row to go. One thing that I forgot to do, well, kind of forgot. I thought about it and then it was too late each time. And that was the center line. I kept forgetting to sand out the center line. So I got all the teeth in. I'm like, all right, I need to go back and sand out that pencil mark center line. And as I was sanding, I kept scratching my fingers on the teeth, kept scratching my fingers, and then finally on this top section here, I just sliced right in. So you can't really see here because it didn't really start bleeding yet, but I cut that knuckle, I cut another thumb. I was just cutting my hands left and right. And I was like, man, there has to be a better way. I was like, wait a minute, this is pencil. So I went and got the pencil that I marked it in with, has an eraser on the back end, and sure enough, the pencil just erased right off. Probably worked so well because it was already oiled, and so that oil acted as a buffer, and so the pencil just erased perfectly. It's still pretty dirty here, but that's just because I did need to sand some of the sections. And then the last step here before I oil it again, I am going to oil just this club side of the Kanabo, mainly because I did a lot of sanding work on it. But before I get to that, I need to do this right here. And what I'm doing is I'm cleaning off all of the spillover epoxy. There's just a ton of spillover epoxy on each tooth, and I just needed to clean it all off. I'm using a wire brush with my Dremel. If you don't push too heavy, it doesn't dig into the wood, really. You have to be careful. But if you're just light enough and you don't stick in one spot for too long, you can actually remove that epoxy and not scratch up or mess up your wood for the most part. Sometimes you do a little bit and you might have to sand it down, but it's not too bad. So I have this piece pretty much finished now. The only step here is to let that last section dry. But since I didn't get a good shot oiling it, we're just going to go ahead and skip this section here and take a look at the finished piece. There's really nothing left in the build here. It's just waiting for it to set, waiting for the oil to dry. So here is the finished Kanabo. Jeez, I keep messing it up. So you can see the two grain. So I've got that center grain and then the two outer grain. Technically it's 3 grain, but the two outer are from the same piece of coal wood. But man, the offset looks absolutely beautiful. The glue up looked really nice. I liked the diamond shape down here on the bottom. That turned out really nice. And the club head just looks beastly. I definitely was swinging this around. You have to be careful. I was a little bit nervous because if I nicked my shoulder or something while I was swinging around, that would just slice into me. I am going to be testing this piece. I figured the worst thing that would happen is I might break some teeth. I'm not worried about the club head snapping. It's pretty solid. The grain goes long ways down the entire piece, so I'm not worried at all about snapping the wood. It's really just I want to break as little teeth as I can just so that I don't have to fix so many. But if I break 1 or 2, I'm not too worried about it. You can see though that when you look at it from that angle, all the teeth line up perfectly, which is exactly what I was hoping for. But this is just beautiful. I absolutely love it. So here's another shot of me holding it just so you can get a good size. It's not too big of a piece. I've seen pictures of Kanabos are just massive. This is about, I don't know, maybe 2.5, 3 feet long. It's still a good size piece. Like, it feels good in the hand. The balance point's right past the handle, and so it feels nice to swing. So this first test I'm going to be doing with the cantaloupe, I'm not using the ballistic gel because blunt force weapons on ballistic gel just don't do much. But on a cantaloupe and pineapple, it should do something. So I'm going to try this first hit, just a baseball swing. Totally messed up. So I didn't really go for a full swing, just because I wanted to kind of get a practice hit in first, and sure enough, I hit the bag. So I'm just going to go from a top to bottom hit and see how well that one does. It didn't really do much damage to the the cantaloupe. Either strikes. The bag that it's on just absorbed all of the strike. So you could see it pushed it into the bag, but it did almost nothing to the cantaloupe. It's just bouncing. So it's, I mean, the teeth are stabbing into it, and it's not doing any damage to the teeth, but I'm just tearing up the bag. The cantaloupe's just bouncing around. It did chip one tooth just a tiny bit, but I mean, almost nothing. So now I'm gonna hit the pineapple. It's a little bit easier target because it's sitting taller. So I'm gonna go for a stronger hit. I'm just making sure my kids are nowhere close to me. I'm not gonna go for a crazy swing because I definitely don't want this thing to slip out of my hands. So I'm gonna go for a very controlled strike. That time I hit perfect, right onto the cantaloupe. It did break off a single tooth. So you can see right there, that bull shark tooth broke off, which is actually kind of gnarly. I'm imagining getting hit with this and it breaking off teeth inside of you. I mean, even if it broke off all the teeth, it's still a baseball bat. So I mean, you're still going to do some damage with it. But look at that. So then that's just with a controlled strike. That's not like me going full blast. If I had hit this just full strength, I probably would have just completely blasted the thing in half. So it's pretty awesome. This was a ton of fun. I loved this piece. I really enjoyed working on it. I hope you enjoyed it too. If you liked it, please leave a comment and like and subscribe. It really helps out a lot. This has been a dream build of mine for a really long time, so I'm happy I finally got to do it. Well, I'll see you next time. Mahalo plenty. Aloha.